Hello and welcome to this video in which we will discuss the repeated and increasingly serious violations of our airspace. Recently, this caused a low-cost Gerber missile to hit a military training camp in Lithuania. Then more than 20 drones entered Polish airspace. And finally, the three Mikoyan Gurevich 31 fighters armed with RR missiles that violated Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. This week, we note the Russian attitude is growing increasingly aggressive. And to understand our response to these acts, we also need to look back and observe how different countries have reacted to the Russians. In the same situations, with, in some cases, a firm attitude, and in others, a kind of laxness that has led us to the current situation. Let me first suggest that we take a quick look back. Until 2013, which I see as when Russia started testing our limits. Last October, we discovered from leaked Russian army documents that, in fact, they trained to launch bombings on Western European countries using their navy from the Atlantic coast, avoiding the need to fly over eastern countries to reach France. These training exercises, which began in 2013, included nuclear-capable missiles. In the same year, 2013, they also carried out an offensive action against Sweden, in which there were two Tupolev 22s, which are strategic bombers, escorted by 4 fighters that were put in a firing position to attack. 2 air bases south of Stockholm, as well as the island of Gotland, which controls naval and air access to the Baltic Sea. These 6 aircraft entered Swedish airspace, and Sweden, which obviously according to its doctrine should have scrambled fighter jets or at least defended itself, did absolutely nothing. For Russia, this is clearly the first sign. We don't have the courage or the means to even try to stop them from violating our airspace and practicing dropping atomic bombs on our territory. Just speeches, nothing more. Russia is starting again. A Tupolev 134 entered Estonia that year, violating its airspace, yet there was no response. From then on, Russia will grow increasingly aggressive. In 2014, Sweden had 2 Sukhoi 24s and Estonia had an Ilyushin 20. Another simulated attack on Sweden involved 2 Sukhoi 24s and 4 Sukhoi 27s. In 2015, it was a Tupolev 22 that entered Sweden, and when Russia tried to do it again with another Tupolev 22, a few months later, it was intercepted as the plane adopted an attack profile before entering the airspace. But in 2015, on another front, things started to happen. On October 3rd, a Russian Sukhoi 30 plane violated Turkish airspace. The Turks tried to scramble their fighter jets, but couldn't intercept it in time. And they said, the next time this happens, if your plane comes, we'll shoot it down. What do the Russians do? They try again a month later. On November 24th, a Turkish F-16 shoots down a Sukhoi 24. The plane entered the airspace for 8 seconds and was shot down 12 seconds later, the time it took for the missile to arrive. The Turks don't mess around, so what does that mean? That the Turks command respect. What was the consequence for Turkey? 0, except that they never had their airspace violated again. On the European side, it's continuing and even accelerating. In 2016, a Russian Sukhoi 27 entered Finland and another entered Estonia on the same day. Aircraft from Belarus also entered Lithuania. In 2017, it was 2 MiG-31S and an Antonov 26 that entered Finland, as well as a Tupolev 154 in Finland. Later, an Ilyushin 76 appeared in Estonia, along with 2 more fighters, including one from Lithuania. In 2018, 4 planes committed 3 violations over Estonia, and 11 Russian planes simulated an attack on a Norwegian radar. Although they didn't enter Norwegian airspace in that case, in 2019, another Russian aircraft entered Finland. In 2020, there was a Sukhoi 27 that entered Denmark. In 2021, 2 Sukhoi 24s entered Finland, as well as 2 Sukhoi 35s in Estonia. We're facing a situation that's escalating even before the high-intensity war. They started before 2014, before the first Crimean War, and then they obviously accelerated with the invasion of Ukraine, since there are more than 50 cases of violations that have been identified by global databases. And I'm only talking about the violations, not the interceptions, not the times when they get close and we have to intercept them. No, these are actually deliberate violations of the airspace of European and NATO countries. It's going to reach peaks of severity. For example, when a Sukhoi 27 enters Swedish airspace. Hold on. Under its wings, there could potentially be atomic bombs, because from the outside you can't tell. You can't tell the difference between a training bomb and a real bomb. But Sweden was still violated in 2022 by a plane carrying atomic bombs. I don't know if you realize how serious this situation is, and we made sure not to see them. But in any case, the intensity and the number have only been increasing over the past few weeks. Except, of course, in Turkey, which has put a big stop to it. Now, next to Turkey, we can look at another case, which is Azerbaijan. When Azerbaijan accidentally shot down a Russian helicopter, it was over Armenia. They hit a helicopter on the other side, which was supposedly on a peacekeeping mission. Well, they shot it down, they apologized, just like the Turks apologized, and that was the end of it. And by the way, in 2023, when Azerbaijan invaded Nagorno-Karabakh and part of Armenia, what was the position of the forces? Russian troops who were on the ground and were responsible for keeping the peace, 0. They pulled out, they were bombed at their military site, they just said nothing. Because when they face a force that asserts its will, well, the Russians are the ones who back down. You can see it in Turkey and Azerbaijan. Also, the Russians are increasingly allowing themselves more, not even in Russian airspace. That is to say, obviously, if any drone, plane or fighter jet entered Russian airspace illegally, they would be shot down in the blink of an eye. That would be normal and legitimate. There would be no war or attack as they just enforced their local law. Whereas on the contrary, the Russians, they always go further in provocation. For example, by firing warning shots at German helicopters over the Baltic Sea, or with a fighter jet that will fire at a British RC-135 that was in the Black Sea. Fortunately, the missile malfunctioned, according to Russian media. Can you believe they fired a missile at a manned plane that wasn't a threat since it had no missiles under its wings? There are also intentional destructions of these drones. There was a lot of talk about it, deliberately colliding with this drone to avoid shooting it down, but nevertheless, they destroyed it. They attempted the same with another large French drone over the Mediterranean. We can also talk about our planes being targeted by radar, for example, this Atlantic 2, which was in the Baltic, and there, the radar targeting. That means it's the last step before firing a missile. It's like putting a sniper's red dot on its forehead. The radar is no longer just monitoring, it's no longer just operating, it's locked on, we're locked on by the radar. It's the last step before getting shot at. And since they've already fired at an RC-135 in the Black Sea, we don't know if they're going to shoot at us or not. I'm not even mentioning the many dangerous maneuvers where they get close to planes just to impress them. But in any case, these are maneuvers that are dangerous, which we avoid, except the Russians always try to scare us and make us run away. To sum up, they attack us in places where we have the right to be. They would obviously shoot down any aircraft that entered their airspace, and that's normal. And we're still in a situation where it's crazy to think that the only country that's being respected is Ukraine. You don't have a Russian plane coming within 30 kilometers of the Ukrainian border or the front line? You can easily enter NATO airspace, but not Ukrainian airspace. The 3031S that entered Estonian airspace on September 19 stayed there for 12 minutes. Let me remind you that the Turks fired after just 8 seconds, and we have all the means, even on the ground, without scrambling jets. Our air defense batteries can intercept any aircraft over the Baltic. And we're talking about 1031S, which are fighters that can go Mach 3 if necessary. These interceptors carried RR missiles under their wings. That means if we send a plane for reconnaissance, potentially that plane could also be targeted. Are they going to shoot at us like they did in the past? We're talking about 1031 with no communication, transponder, flight plan, and to which we don't respond. Yes, it's serious. Poland had a larger incident with over 20 drones, but those drones were unarmed, unlike the one that crashed in Lithuania. So, we're dealing with a whole different level of seriousness here because of the duration, the scale, the volume, and the weaponry that's on board. So we need to stop looking for excuses to find good reasons not to act. There aren't 50 answers, and politicians today simply need to have language that is clear and firm. The next violation of our airspace by Russia will lead to shooting down any aircraft that legitimately violated our airspace. Just as the Turks warned the next time, they acted. We need a doctrine of engagement that is clear. We shouldn't wait for a decision from Italy or the other side of the world. In the United States, if they violate our airspace, they're targeted. And 50 seconds later, if they haven't turned back, we shoot them down. They'll know it. They can't deny that we warned them, that we were lenient by letting them go that far. And I already know what the political response will be. It will be to put in more resources. But you can have 50 fighters in the Baltic countries if they're not allowed to shoot, though. Their only job is to confirm the Russians' presence and observe below, which clearly has no impact. And so, as long as we limit ourselves to just being outraged and making grand statements, the Russians will go further. Just as they've been doing since the beginning and as they've been escalating for 12 years now. The problem is that they manage to make people believe that they're strong, that we're not capable of defending ourselves. Some think we couldn't win an air war against Russia, but we're actually far stronger. With Rafales, F-35s, Gripens and Eurofighters, our air power clearly outmatches Russian aviation. Obviously they wouldn't get into a confrontation because we'd crush them. They're not even capable of taking control over Ukrainian airspace. And so the problem is that the decision making is done by politicians, and basically it's a risk-taking process. But risk-taking is perceived very differently depending on who you talk to. In a military or geopolitical environment, obviously risk-taking is a factor that can lead to success. So we take risks, and that avoids a status quo that makes things worse. Politicians are the opposite. They're trained and follow a mental process. Avoid risk, which means constant backtracking. And that's why the only politician who says exactly what needs to be done. So he sides with all the military people you'll discuss this with? Everywhere. Headquarters, television shows, they say we must act firmly and shoot down any planes entering our airspace. So you only have the Czech president, who is the former chief of staff of the Czech army, who is aligned with this rhetoric. Which is the one of firmness? Which is the only one that will work? So there is no solution. As long as there is no firmness, as long as there is no clear doctrine that the Russians will know before violating our airspace. Once again, they might come into contact once again, and that will be the last time, because they won't escalate. They've already escalated so much if we put a stop to it. That's when we'll see a reduction in this tension, a reduction in these incursions, and obviously we'll avoid further escalations that could lead us to war in 3 or 4 years, for example, with the Netherlands, as I already explained to you in a previous video, for which I'll put the link in the comments of this video. So, courage is needed at the political level, and basically the awareness of this seriousness should be the same among politicians as it is among the military in all European countries today. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry about the framing, I didn't have much time to make this video. It was a bit improvised. I hope there won't be too many illustrations either. Please forgive me for that. And I'll see you very soon for new analyses. See you soon for new analyses.